Morning, Chef. Keeshig and for showing us today. So, again, tell us a little bit about yourself,
Yeah,
your background,
yeah.
food, everything.
So I'm First Nations Ojibwa. I'm from a reserve about 45 minutes up the peninsula called Cape Croker or Nawash in Ojibwa. I specialize in what I call progressive Indigenous cuisine. I'm showcasing techniques that I've learned from working in Michelin restaurants and 100 best restaurants, but applying it to ingredients that Ojibwe were eating along Georgian Bay. So, we're foraging quite a bit. We're having wild game shop for us and showcasing that in the tasting menu. Um, I just turned 35 the end of August. So I've been cooking since I was about 16, 17. So I've been cooking for almost 20 years now. We run an ambitious sort of restaurant. We're using unique ingredients to come up with, new dishes that they may seem familiar, but with unique ingredients and unique flavors. We're really striving to be the first, Indigenous restaurant, an Indigenous-led restaurant in Canada to get a recommendation or a star from Michelin would be quite nice. And I believe we're well on our way. I'm about to leave in the next couple of weeks to go to a 2-star Michelin place in New York City called Aska. To do a bit of training. So hopefully, go there, learn some stuff, bring it back, and elevate what we're doing to the next level.
Nice. So, me personally, I don't know nothing about Ojibwe food and
Yeah.
culture. So, how would you describe it? Is there any difference from like the stereotypical quote unquote,
Well, that was the thing, right? Like when I started doing this stuff, there were no indigenous chefs whatsoever. So when I decided I wanted to do, a version of indigenous food, at first I was going to try to remodernize recipes from my grandmother or my aunts and stuff like that. But when I went back to the reserve and I was asking about that stuff, there was nothing to be handed down. I'm not sure if it's from colonialism or things like that. It was more spoken philosophies and things like that. So that's when we decided, I'll use the training that I have and do sort of a bit more of a progressive style. I'm a big believer, like if I ask anybody on the street, or even yourself, like, what do you think indigenous food is? I'm sure you'd say, I don't know, moose meat or wild rice or things like that. But I'm a firm believer that, like we're here today serving our sweetgrass ice cream. Who's to say that that's not indigenous these days, right? Like, sweetgrass has been used quite significantly in our culture, from smudging ceremonies to using regalia to using baskets and things like that. But now we're using it as like a vanilla substitute and introducing people to our culture. So who's to say that that's not sort of a progressive style or, a new vision in my story of what indigenous food could be?
And what do you think some of the misconceptions people might have about
Well,
indigenous
I
food?
think it's just there's so few indigenous chefs doing this type of stuff or putting their spin and their version on what indigenous food could be. It's so new, I believe, that there's a few of us pioneering what it is and sort of where it's at today. And I think it's things like this and interviews with people like you that are gonna help, put indigenous food on the mainstream of Canada. I'm a big believer that, we always hear about Chinese food, French food, Asian food, but indigenous food should have its moment and should be on that same sort of level where people are talking about it at home. Instead of tonight going out for Chinese food, let's go out for, an indigenous meal. And I believe that's where we're headed.
So you said in one of your interviews, much of your cooking is about educating and storytelling.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So it'll be the same philosophy we had last night. We call it show and tell in the restaurant because we're very lucky with where we are in Ontario, where we get very unique ingredients from us foraging these things and then from purveyors bringing us stuff. So we like to do like the chaga dessert you had last night. We do a bit of a story about the chaga and why we use it. And then later on, we'll bring the chaga to the table so you can actually see what it looks like, feel it, touch it, and learn how we turn this into a dessert type thing. So that's why we try to do a bit of education and a bit of what we call show and tell in the restaurant. Just trying to educate diners about some of the traditional ingredients that we may have used and use in our cooking these days.
Yeah, that the fungi is very interesting.
Yeah,
The taste and
yeah,
everything is very interesting. So you started doing tasting menus locations like Farmers Market, I think,
yeah,
behind us.
yeah.
So how was that transition over to sort of more brick and mortar restaurant?
Well, it was the pop up was even more difficult than a brick and mortar. Like we were at the farmers market Saturdays and Sundays. We would build a restaurant Saturday, tear it down Sunday. We did that for 6 months. Every single week. And then we were going to markets with our sourdough breads, all that sort of stuff. So it was time for me to, invest in myself and invest in my staff and have a brick and mortar restaurant. Nothing has really changed. It's a bit more difficult for us because we're not, say, using GFS and stuff like that to have, this big truck bring us food every single week. We're going out to the gardens to see what's there. We're looking into our pantry to see what we've pickled, what we've dried. We're looking to see what's been killed for us this week. So that has been a bit more difficult finding enough food for a dinner service for 4 nights a week. But I feel like, every week and, every time we do this, we just keep getting better and better. As I was saying, we get pigeons killed for us every single week. We just got a bunch of ducks killed that we're using. We had a pig harvested for us last week. I don't normally use pork or chicken and stuff like that, but this pig was raised and bred on the reserve that I'm from. So we've decided to use pork. So it's things like that.
Cool. And as you said, the menu at Naagan focuses on foraging and locally sourced
Yeah.
ingredients. So those restaurants are more common nowadays.
Yeah.
So what would you say, Ojibwe people, or just the way that you do it, how's it different from other people? Or
Well, I think it's the uniqueness of the ingredient. You know what I mean? Everybody says they forage, but it's always the same, it's always the same stuff, like spruce tips and you know what I mean? Wild leeks and things like that. But I don't think anybody's going out there and, foraging autumn olive. They're getting the quince, they're getting, fresh pears from somebody, serving the chaga, getting fresh birds killed for them, making these glazes for our birds and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's sort of the same philosophy that everybody's doing, but I think we've just taken it to the next level with the uniqueness of ingredients showcased in our tasting menu.
nice. Some of the things that I also notice is the non-alcoholic pairing, the
Yeah,
drinks. So I find a lot of times when you go to different restaurants, even at the very high end levels,
yeah,
the flavor profile is very similar. So
uh-huh,
like citrus or apples or
yeah.
that sort of thing. So how do you make yourself differ from, again, other
Well,
places?
once again, I think it's a uniqueness of ingredients. We're forging a lot of stuff like the autumn olive. Nobody's really heard of autumn olive before, but when we grab it, it almost has this. If you have red wine, like it almost has this tannicky kind of flavor that we like to use in the drinks. That adds. It almost mimics that same sort of wine essence, or even something you had last night, nana berries. Nobody's ever had nana berries before. They're these wild berries that have a very similar texture and flavor to bananas, but we've turned them into, a non-alcoholic beverage to pair with the tasting menu.
Mhm. Is there anything that you're trying to develop or perfect? Maybe something that's not well known outside your community. Is something like that's quote unquote lost or
Mm.
been from traditions.
I think um, I don't know if there's anything I've lost. I think we're just always trying to seek um a bit more traditional knowledge of what, our people were foraging and, using a bit more of the medicines, traditional medicines to try to create unique food. And I think that's something that we're diving into every single day. I've been very lucky to hire my sous chef, Samantha, who's from Nipissing First Nation. So, instead of it just being myself doing this stuff nowadays, we have multiple people on the team that can go home, ask for a bit more knowledge, and then I'm just educating myself too, right? So it's always about learning about new ingredients and just trying to push the envelope on our food every single day and make it interesting and delicious as well.
It's more of a mix of different nations and how
Yeah, I think
different things.
that's one of the next things that I want to do. Like once the restaurant's pretty settled, like I would love to one day travel to different reserves and learn maybe some of the cooking techniques and some of the foraged ingredients that they're using to bring back home, to incorporate into our tasting menu.
That's awesome. So, what do you think of general outlook of Indigenous dining in Canada? Like, how do you make it more accessible or more popular?
I think it's people like yourself. We've been very lucky to do some news outlets and be on TV and stuff like that. So I think It's things like that that are gonna help get the word out, and then people like myself, spreading the word about Indigenous culture and food. There's so few of us doing this type of stuff. I think we have to support each other, talk about it, reference each other, point people in the same direction, to where these other Indigenous chefs are doing this type of thing. And I believe in the next few years, you're gonna hear about Indigenous culture and Indigenous food, on the map of Canada and hopefully globally, even more than it is now.
I'm sure, like, with even in other countries with their indigenous people,
Yeah.
they have their own approaches,
Yeah,
so that would be fun.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that was where I kinda learned this, right? Like, I forget where it was I seen it, but I seen a man doing, a more modern take on Indian food, and that's where I was like, "You know what? I can do that because I have this training. Like, what am I gonna use this training for? Like, why don't we do, my version of my story of Indigenous food?"
Right. So what do you expect in general when people come to Naagan?
I'm hoping that we have, a great experience for people. We've educated people a little bit about, what we're doing. And of course, hopefully the food tastes good. In the end, we can throw all these unique ingredients on a plate and, show off as much as we want. But in the end, we are serving food to customers, a medium to high price. And so in the end, the food has to taste good and we have to put on a good experience and showcase, what Noggin is about and what progressive Indigenous food is about.
Tell us one kitchen secret restaurant, or restaurant kitchen secret, whatever it be.
One restaurant kitchen secret, a workhorse and actually, I don't even wanna say that. I think one kitchen secret is, you know, I may be the face of this stuff, but there's people behind me every single day who have put just as much work in and just as many hours into what we're doing. Um, you have to build a good team. You have to have people you trust and people that are willing to dedicate their time and their lives to your vision and what you're believing. You know what I mean? I was like today with Tristan, we're going to spend 14 hours working today, right? And that's time that he's never going to get back. So I'm very appreciative of him, spending his life and his time helping pursue my dreams.
It's a tough industry to be in for sure.
Yeah.
Last question for you. Thanks again, Chef Sisik, for being with us. Any exciting plans in the future, other than obviously you going to New York, but other than that?
Yes, we're doing a pop-up the end of Toronto or the end of November in Toronto. We're taking over a space for 3 nights. We're very lucky that we posted and it's sold out that night. So we're looking forward to showcasing new dishes, new pottery, new education, new storytelling with this new menu that we're working on here. We're going to be serving some pork. We're going to keep the pigeon. We're going to serve a new rabbit dish. We're gonna do a new sort of palate cleanser, a new ice cream. We're working on a whole bunch of new stuff.
Nice. Yeah, sounds like a fun thing and
Yeah.
expanding sort of the
Yeah, well, it's
exposure.
also it's also we wanna bring down, um with restaurants like this, we wanna be a destination restaurant too. We want people to come travel to try Indigenous food and, help bring, uh, some more economy, paid economy, people shopping around our stores, things like that. It's a bit more, travel and stuff like that, and I believe we're well on our way for that.
Cool.